Welcome to Perspectives, a podcast by Essence Learning LLC, and a place where leaders learn from leaders. Let's join today's episode.
Welcome, everyone, to Essence Learning Podcast, Perspectives. So excited for this new episode that we have coming up and the guests that we have here. We're going to talk about the evolution of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And I couldn't think of three better panelists to help share in this conversation. And I'm going to give some room for them to introduce themselves and to share a little bit about what they do in this space. But I want to thank you guys for being here. I am humbled by you being a part of this. Very excited. And I was sharing before we got started, I was hoping I didn't get real sentimental about it because it really does touch me. And I'm very passionate about the space, and then to have you all here to help share in this conversation. So the evolution of diversity, equity, inclusion is in the workplace. What I'd like for us to do is just to have a real conversation about it, what you know, where it started. And so as you start to introduce yourselves, just go ahead and share that. We'll and share your perspective of how you got started in this space. And then we'll continue the conversation around, where it started and how it's impacting the world around us today. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to ask April to get us started and share a little bit about yourself and how you got into this space.
Sure. My name is April Thomas. I am the Chief Solutions Officer for SDMS 360, and that's Strategic Diversity Management Solutions 360. And how I got started in the space is through my father, Dr. Roosevelt Thomas Jr., who is considered the father of diversity and diversity management. And upon his passing, I decided to continue to run his business. And so it's been a pleasure. It's been a great learning experience, and along the way getting to meet people such as yourself, Valerie, and of course working with Dr. Holmes and Ruben. It's a pleasure to meet you. And thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. Okay, Ruben, let's hear from you if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation. Excited to be here with you all. My name is Ruben Gonzales. I work for a large healthcare company. We help lead a global DE&I strategy for 66,000 employees across this wonderful world that we're in. And I first came into the space by means of recruiting. So, I've loved to see how we've progressed from DE&I being a cute to have, nice to have, to it being a fundamental strategic thing that we embed as part of an organization. And I'm happy to share in this conversation with y'all.
Thank you, Ruben. And to my friend, Dr. Holmes, welcome.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Holmes. I am an independent consultant now, kind of in my third round of retirement.
Elizabeth.
I actually got recruited. I'm here by accident in a way, but I met Dr. Thomas when I was working in North Carolina for the Center for Creative Leadership. We were invited by a major corporation to do a program for their senior executive teams. And so Dr. Thomas, and a third consultant, and a consultant from the center were asked by this client to put this program together. And the people that the client wanted from the center were not available for the dates that they had already established. So they reluctantly said, well, could you do it?
That's something.
So I was like, of course, so that's how I got invited. But in doing that program, so I was there for the leadership portion of it. And of course, Dr. Thomas was there for the diversity management portion of it. And so that's how I got to meet him. And it was a 2-year project. So at the end of that project, he asked if I would come and work with him as a consultant. So I did.
On the journey for a while then. Thank you all for those introductions. connections. And so when we think about, for some of us who are just getting introduced into the diversity, equity, inclusion space, for some of those audience members who are just now learning about it, for some who are just becoming aware of the real value and the need, I think we know that that's not a new thing, right? This has been something that's ongoing. Share with me what has been the evolution. I think, when we thought about this topic, we talked about it from starting in 1960 with the civil rights and evolving through the social realm, and now it's in the workplace. Kind of talk to me, if you will, how you've experienced it through that evolution. Any one of you, and we just make it a conversation. Just jump in. I don't need to call, and you just kind of jump in and let's have this conversation.
Well, I can tell you, for me, it was truly an evolution, because, as I said, I was only ever introduced to it as a subject at the Center for Creative Leadership, and my association with Dr. Thomas actually led to my doing a very small portion of one of our leadership programs we incorporated diversity training into one of our standard leadership programs, and I was asked to do that. And it wasn't very much, and it wasn't, it was a 5-day program. I think I had maybe a morning, of that time. And I was doing some very basic stuff, trying to simply distinguish diversity management from affirmative action for these organizational leaders. But in going through the program that I described earlier, where we worked on for another client, I learned how Dr. Thomas was talking about diversity. And he seldom would say diversity, he would always say diversity management, because he saw the term diversity would generate so much negativity in people's minds that he was trying to make people understand, or help people understand, that this is a discipline, that you can learn how to manage diversity. Most people were talking about having it, and he was talking about managing it. And that to me was like the first distinction that was really clear to me.
That's revolutionary right there. If you just kind of think about the idea that we're not managing the people, the diverse people, we're managing the tension or the existence between the two. And so I'm not trying to change you as an individual or manage you as an individual. I'm just trying to manage the differences that exist between us that may be causing us some friction or tension, right?
Right.
And that was just, oh, that's what we're doing. I'm not doing representation. I'm managing the tension between the two of us. Then it was like, okay, we can do that, right?
Yeah.
So that was, you're right. That was one of those turning points, I think.
It was. And it was very different from what I knew once I got involved in the subject itself, and I was seeing other people deliver diversity programs. They were primarily what we used to dub shame and blame programs, where they would invite mostly white men to the classes. It was almost like targeted for white males, because they were leaders of the organization. And the more well-known programs and deliverers of such programs were really, shaming and blaming. And it was very negative. But Dr. Thomas's approach was just totally from a business perspective. It was very, very different, and not, interestingly enough, very well received in the diversity community, among the diversity practitioners, because they were focused primarily on having diversity. So it was a representation focus and a social justice focus. I don't want to diminish what they were doing. They were trying to right some wrongs, from a social justice standpoint, but they were not connecting it to why it was important to the business.
there's part of that evolution that we've seen that you just kind of talked about. So if we kind of pause right there to say it started with the idea that we need to right some wrongs.
Mm-hmm.
Also understood that there took some disciplines and some principles that we needed to apply in order to make everybody involved in it. This is the shame and the blame kind of thing. I love it.
Exactly.
So now we're at the point where we're not thinking about just representation in this walk, right? We've kind of walked a little bit more further, and now we're thinking about equity and inclusion. How did that evolve, and how I want to add to how you saw that evolution as we move from representation, and now we're kind of moving ourselves towards what's this new thing, equity and inclusion, because it's no longer just a diversity program that we're like you said, incorporating in some training. We're now having some real discussion about how do we manage it. What's this all about? Anybody want to add to that? Add to the evolution?
Well, I think when I came in, I came in 2013. So what I was thinking about when I first heard about equity, I always heard it in the context of an educational setting. The context that I heard it was like that was the framework that institutions were trying to approach diversity and inclusion. They added the equity component to it. And that's when as I was trying to understand just as a newbie in this space, what does all this mean? That was my understanding of equity. But then, it's expanded beyond just from an equity perspective from what the little bit that I knew about the colleges, but to equity in terms of, say, pay, between men and women, between different races. There's a difference, like women make 70 cents for every dollar or something that men make, those kind of stats, to even now, Elizabeth and I were talking earlier, and you mentioned health equity. So I think the broader we begin to expand, I think for me, what I would even go back before the 1960s, because this is something new that I learned, that when you go back to the Constitution, the basis for the U.S. Constitution is what I've heard this thing called the doctrine of discovery. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it basically was a papal bull. I just learned about this like a couple months ago, but a papal bull that basically gave Western Europeans, if you go to any place and they aren't Christians, you can take their land and you can enslave them. Mm-hmm. And it became basically the foundation for Western law, particularly in the U.S. And so you fast forward to the Constitution, you notice that there's no law saying that, basically equates to the white male being the standard or kind of and everybody else is less than. And I see the laws that we're passing as attempts to restore people back to that same standard, to that kind of standard of, by law, what was established by kind of papal decree that's established for the white male. Mm-hmm. In the sense of you are because you are. Everybody else is trying to get to that place of you are through the law. And I think that is, for me, that's why you mentioned, like in the preview of the questions, the different laws that have passed, the equal pay. Right. And I think they're all efforts to restore restore everybody else back to a place of wholeness. Yeah. Where the Constitution had declared that we weren't whole, whether you're female, whether you're Black, and then throughout the generations, multiple people who would come to the country, Irish, Italian, and then never mind the modern immigration patterns of Latinx and further people from other African countries. And so I see it as, in that sense, my point is that as we begin to expand the scope of who needs to be restored back to this, what we've established and set up as the standard. I'm not saying that it should be the standard, but that's what it is at this moment. That's when the conversation begins to expand of what are we looking at. That's why you have equity that comes in, and you've got inclusion, and you've got belonging, you've got justice. There's so many places where everybody except for the white male, and even there are places where white males aren't at that standard of white, whatever that standard has been defined.
Economic and social abilities.
Yeah. Right. And
so are you basically saying then that we've evolved, but now we see that more that we have the conversation around, per se, equity and including this diverse all this diversity mixtures that we're looking at, all the different dimensions of diversity. Now we need equity to be almost a reinforcement of not going back to those old laws. What do you see the role of equity in that what you described? I think that was a huge point that you made, that history can repeat itself basically if we're not in step with kind of righting the wrongs and keeping diligent about righting those wrongs. And so I think of equity, as you just talked about there, as being that whole fast, that and everybody has fair and equal rights. And if fair and equal rights aren't there, that's our standard, regardless of whether you're white male or whether you're
Right.
Hispanic origin, whatever. Our standard is fair and equal opportunities. And when
Yeah.
that doesn't line up, we have equity to help have that conversation. That's not what we're trying to do here, guys. We're trying to, otherwise we would be kind of going in a cycle if we didn't have that standard. So I think we're putting equity in place to be that standard or that compass for us.
Right.
I guess,
Yeah.
can you see? So we've evolved to that because diversity is here, and then now we kind of evolved to that compass, to what you were bringing up, April.
Yeah, I think it's something that has to keep, and I think, there'll be other elements that we recognize in our attempts to make that align. There are things that we see that we don't have language for, that will down the road will probably add something else. And I think the challenge, it's not a challenge, it's just what is, like you said, that standard. What is that standard? Because it can't be based around it shouldn't be based around a people. And it shouldn't be, ideally, it wouldn't be around the law, because laws can,
Right.
I remember when I,
Biases.
thinking about the Civil Rights Act, I was like, okay, well, that can be undone. The Loving Act, they're talking about now with changing the abortion law, that can be undone. Everything can be undone by law. So what is it that we get to that people just are, as opposed to it being something that a body can give to you or take away from you?
Take away. Very good point.
One of the
Ruben.
things
I'm sorry.
along those, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good.
Along those lines, one of the things that Roosevelt used to say was, there was very much, people would tout the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. And what he started coining was what he called the platinum rule: treat others as they wish to be treated. So making a distinction between yourself and what you need, and being tuned into what other people need for themselves. And so equal treatment is not necessarily equitable treatment, because some people need things that are different from others. And I think that nuance of difference is troublesome when people are, it's easier to say, well, let's treat everybody the same. But everybody, that forces the idea that everybody is the same.
Right. That goes back to April's point, right?
Right. And to say everybody's not the same is not a good thing,
Right.
And so, but then why are we, it's true that everybody's not the same, and we would not really want everybody to be the same, but that's easier to get a hold of, that's easier to grasp than to focus on the infinite number of differences that each person brings to the table, even in
So
just
that
one
kind of,
family.
and then that took you to the conversation of inclusion, right? So we all want to be included. We all have different needs, and we need to have them met in a different way. So even
Right.
though I may have the same need, I may need education, I may not need education until 2 years from now, where someone else needs it right away, or I may not
Right.
need to. So I may need the same things, maybe not at the same time, or I may need it a different way because of my abilities or disabilities, or because of my lens that I see things in. I may need to have it presented to me in a different way. So even though I may need the same resource, I may need it in a different way, delivered in a different
Right.
approach. So now we're talking about that individuality around inclusion. So we've kind of evolved.
Exactly.
Every time we have a discussion, it's like, oh my gosh, now you want it included, you want it your way. First, you want to be at the table. Now you
Yeah.
want it. Now here you want it to be, you want to have a voice too. Come on, people. What now you want to have a sense of belonging. This is just continuing on. So it is complex, right? And
It
has
is very complex. Yeah.
So each conversation takes us to another point.
Yeah.
So what do you have to add to our conversation, Ruben? We kind of
I'm just taking it all in because I'm resonating with everything that Elizabeth's saying and that April said and you, Val. I might table the subject of legislation, and I would hope that one day we could be equitable or equal. We're far from that. But if I'm being honest, I don't even know that corporate America understands what equity is. We're so stuck on trying to achieve equality in society that I don't know that we can achieve equity in corporate America. But the aspiration to do just that is what's going to progress an organization. And so when I think of equity
before you go there, explain why you don't think corporate America can get there. I know you don't do that, but I want to get some more context. I want some more context behind that statement, because as our listeners are hearing that, I want to make sure that people hear the reason why you feel that way.
Well, we will never achieve equity, and we'll never achieve equity in society. We'll never achieve equity in corporate America. It's just not feasible. But we can strive to, update our policies and our practices, and be diligent about change management practices whenever necessary, and really try to instill that the organization stands for equity. And although we may not achieve it, we're gonna keep moving toward that line. The reality is that in business, there's a dollar to be made. We're in business for business. And I think they almost conflict with each other. And so it's
you're
hard.
Saying then it's something that we're always going to strive for.
We're always going to strive.
It's always a needle moving, right? So no matter where we are, the more we grow, the more we're going to need to get to equity, right? So equity is always that moving target. So you never kind of get there, because the more you identify the complexity of this thing, equity becomes a target becomes a little further away. Is that what? Okay, gotcha.
And to your comment of, well, you wanted a seat at the table, and now you want to partake in the conversation, and now you want to engage in making a decision. Well, yes, and that will continue to evolve.
Right.
And that's what organizations that are striving toward equity are doing, right? They're evolving the way in which they engage their employees and how they think about this concept of a work-life balance, if that's even a thing anymore, because I'm working 24/7, I guess, at times. But it's being okay with that, being comfortable with that, and then understanding that as an organization, you have to evolve. You are no longer just the paycheck. So often you're the safe haven. So often you're the beacon light. So often you're going against, the political or policies, within a certain country or region. So I think when we think about equity, I would hope that we would stop throwing it around and stop putting it in our labels, and stop saying we're not just diversity and inclusion anymore. We're diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would hope that organizations are taking a step back and really grasping the gravity of that word and making steps toward that, and understanding that it's okay that we're not going to get there, but the journey and staying on that path is what's important.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Ruben, you're so right, because equity, being equitable is a moving target. It's not a standard. It's not an end point. It continues with whatever challenge arises. It's a mindset. It's so getting to that, it is always so interesting to me when we have we have efforts that we think, and I remember people would say, well, when are we going to know? How do we know if we're
Yeah.
there? And it's like, you're always there, and you're never there. It's a journey.
Exactly. You're always you're never there.
Yeah, it's you have opportunities. You will have continuing opportunities to be there for any given particular situation. But you have to know what it looks like when you're there, so that and when you're there, you realize it's being in that place where your policies are consistent with your practices and behaviors, and that is so not the case. I mean, we have great policies, and where the law comes in, we have great policies that certainly adhere to what the law says, but practices and behaviors, the day-to-day, how we do things around here is really where the rubber meets the road. It's really where you see or don't see equitable behavior.
And so it's the mission to, right, that okay, it's shifted, and so now we need to shift as well. So it continues to move. So the communities that are coming forward now that are concerned with the way they're being treated and concerned with the way that they're being involved or excluded out of things, the women who feel like their rights are being violated, all of those things, as those shift, so does that equitable treatment, right? And
exactly.
So the more we get that voice at the table, the more we hear that I need to add some more policies or look at different procedures or look at the ones that we have and see how to. So the evolution is really around it. It's I love it that it's evolved, but I love the idea that we just said it's not going to stop evolving. You're not going to get there. You are there now. And if you're doing the principles and the practices, this is as much there as you're going to get. And you got to do those same principles and practices tomorrow that you did today. It's almost like whatever you did today may not work tomorrow. So you got to evaluate that with those same lens.
You have to keep
lens, right? Gotcha.
Right. You have to keep revisiting to see, are we still on track? It's like you're going and driving across country and you need to be on a certain road. You could easily go off that road without knowing that you've gone off the road. So you have to keep checking your location. You have to keep seeing, where are we now, and given where we are now, what do we need to do to keep on the path that we are committed to, so we can keep going in the direction that we want to go in.
What a conversation to have with our leadership team. You're never going to get there.
Well, and Val, you bring a good point. And I don't say that to, let the air out of the room, or, for those that are watching this later to feel as if, well, what's the point if we're not going to get there? It's because so often, and I see it all the time, you stand up at diversity council or you stand up an employee resource group and it's like, we're there, we're at equity, and, moving on, right? We've achieved it.
Yeah.
Or, we have, now 10% or 20% of women in leadership, like, we're at equity, which, by the way, isn't equity. It's 50-50 in case you haven't done the math. And it's like, well, moving on now, right? So if organizations will treat DE&I as they do their business, right? Check on it, foster it, grow it, make sure that, we're hitting targets. It would in itself, I think, cultivate an inclusive culture, right? One where everyone really truly feels included. But we have to be comfortable with understanding that we're never going to be there, and that's okay. But without trying or continuing on that road, you will get nowhere. In fact, you'll get left behind. So I encourage you all to continue on the road.
Well, see, the thing about never getting there is, it's like saying, when am I going to grow? When will I be grown? Well, you grow, you continue to grow in some ways forever, ideally, until you're done. And when you're done, you're done. You don't need to grow. There's nothing to grow. But so it's kind of like that. It's an ongoing developmental process. And you could liken it to getting good at something.
Yeah.
Every professional, whatever, golfer, tennis player, whatever, they are continuing to learn the sport. They get coached about how they're doing in that way, in that particular endeavor. And that's really what I think we're talking about when we talk about diversity management. It's like we have to keep learning, because the differences that we encounter are going to continually be different. And so it's a matter of knowing how to manage differences that we have. I think part of the problem, mentally, when we think about it, is that we think of diversity and immediately go to issues of race and gender.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we are dealing with all kinds of diversity all the time. I mean, if you have more than one kid, even if you have one kid, if you have no kids and you have a partner, if you have a pet, you're dealing with diversity all the time. And so what we're saying about equity, what I'm saying, and I think what I've learned from Dr. Thomas, is that when you think about managing diversity, that's managing any dimension of diversity that you encounter. And all of that dimension of diversity that you encounter is just different from what you were thinking it was. You meet a person, you go into a new organization, you have a sense of, or an idea of what this is like, and that's not what I thought it was. How do you manage that? That's really, that's the essence, I think, of what we're talking about.
With each mixture, when April was telling us about mixtures of diversity, with each mixture, every time you get with it, it shifts. So does what we're doing
all day, every day,
all day,
every day.
All day.
So to me, it's a capability, and this is how we talked about it. It's diversity management capability, and so it's a capability. To Ruben's point about, you don't say, okay, I have that capability. I have to keep building on that capability, because that capability gets challenged in different ways that I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
But if I know how to do it, if I know how to manage, then I say, oh, okay, I can apply these principles to this new challenge and figure out how to make it work.
To get a different nail, but you still use a hammer, or use a different different tool. Let me get back in my toolbox and see how to handle that.
Yes, you go back to your toolbox.
Jump in, April. I see you leaning forward. Jump in, April.
I was just going to say, I think with Elizabeth's example, two things. Like, we often, like you said, Ruben, we're like, okay, we have X percentage, we're good. But we never say that about our bottom line. Okay, we've reached $1 million, we're good. We don't need to do any more than that. So we're not going to ever push more. No.
Yeah.
We're always pushing. We never, and it's not a matter of settling. It's just like, I think humanity, our drive is for more, to improve, to build. That's what we're made to build. And so we build in every area, except when it comes to diversity, is we don't build in that. We build to a certain limit, and that's enough. And I think a second thing, because of that, I think a key point comes to what Elizabeth said, the capability. When I think about adding equity, and then we add these different aspects of what we realize, okay, we're short in this area. I think if you have a capability, that can incorporate what you don't know yet, because it's a principle. Principles don't change. And so if you have this principle, so like, I think I'm a musician here, it's my piano here. I started on classical, little kid classical, then I went to classical. I still knew how to play the piano, then I went to jazz. Then I went to contemporary Christian. Then, sometimes I might do a little bit of rock. Sometimes I might just do some meditative kind of woo-woo kind of stuff. But it's all still music. It's all still the same 12 notes, and they're just put into a different order. There's going to be some other type of music that's going to come out that I've never heard of, but I can still learn it because it's still just these 12 notes, basically, and they're just put in a different order, different style, different rhythm. That's the same thing with diversity. I think if you look at it from a mixture perspective, anything that comes across your path, you can deal with it, as opposed to, okay, now we got to learn about race. Now we got to learn about gender. Now we got to learn about sexual orientation. I'm like, that's so overwhelming for, or now never mind just the human demographics. Then you do have, so like in Ruben's case, you said, you shared that your organization is international. You've got country after country after country that you have to deal with in terms of how do you navigate those differences. If you're trying to, granted, there are nuances, you know, just like with a car, so you've been learning how to drive a car, there are nuances depending on the type of car that it is. You know, is it a manual? Is it a stick shift? Is it an automatic? Is it a luxury car? Is it a truck? Is it a motorcycle? There are all types of, but this principles of insert key, steer, gas, you know, brakes, that is the same. And so that's, I think if we could expand our understanding of what we're dealing with when it comes to diversity, that it's not just, yes, you need to look at race and gender and these human demographics, and you also need to realize that you're looking at it when you're looking at it from a organizational perspective. Where do you want to be 5 years from now? You need to have, that's a mixture that you're looking at. You need principles that can help you do that. And I think if we could have that perspective, that would make this process, to your point, we never, like Elizabeth said, both of you said, we're never going to get there, but we're there in process.
Yeah.
And it will make it a lot easier to navigate and to hold all of that.
The whole context around it takes away the complexity of it. So no matter what the diversity is, and no matter where we're trying to do in terms of an equitable treatment, if we apply the same principles in those situations, then we're there as much as we can be there. You know, you're there for now. You're there in the moment, and tomorrow you gotta play the same game.
You got to do something.
Start that car again. Just because I got to point A is not. I got to start that car again and get back on the journey. And so we've got to keep that in mind. You guys, I wish we could continue on this conversation, but I've got people behind me telling me, you know, it's
time already.
What are you doing, right? Can we wrap this up? They love the conversation, and we're very excited. If you could feel the energy in the room, I know you guys are remote, but everybody's excited about hearing what you all have said. I can't imagine how helpful this is going to be to just not the leaders, but in this space around diversity, equity, inclusion, the leaders who are trying to navigate a diverse workforce that has a lot of needs and a lot of requirements and a lot of expectations of the workforce and the workplace and the leaders that they've never had before. And so these types of conversations certainly do help people to feel a little bit more relaxed about it, to know that it is complex, and perhaps I'm not ever going to get to a Z journey because I'm always going to be on this. And hey, I've got space to grow. I've got space to learn, and I've got space to keep it going. So I hope we all stay connected. I hope that if we've said something to you as a listener, that you will make sure you share this with others and make sure that other people are connected with Dr. Holmes and April Thomas and even Ruben as some support for you. But most of all, we hope that you tap into Essence Learning, that you will look at for us on your website. We're always having these conversations and can put you in touch with the right people to help you in your workforce. Thank you all. Gosh, Elizabeth, I see Ruben quite a bit. So it's, well, probably not as much as I like to, but I do see Ruben a little bit more than I've seen April and Dr. Holmes. So I would love to connect with you guys again soon. But thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
A lot of fun. Take good care of yourselves. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Okay.
Thank you for joining Perspectives, a podcast by Essence Learning LLC. Essence Learning is your solution to personal and professional development. We partner with our clients to develop a learning strategy that will increase productivity, enhance performance, and align with their purpose and goals. For more information, visit us online at essencelearning.net or call us at 1-877-657-5755.